Greetings, Hempster. Thank you for tuning in to another hemp episode of HempAware Radio. This is your hemp-entrepreneurial host, Tyler Hemp, here to empower your hemposphere and help you grow your hemp business. We're on a mission to create a paradigm shift in consciousness through the utilization and education of hemp. And I have a special guest with us today, Gary Burns of Hemp Offset and Dow Climate. And we're going to kind of go into what inspired him to create this business to work with hempsters, hemp companies, hemp farmers, and people that are integrating hemp into their business and lifestyle, and how we can actually utilize hemp as a vehicle for sequestering carbon and just the overall mission of carbon removal. And so I'm excited to go into his story and what inspired him to create this company. But before we do, if you are looking for support with your website or your content marketing or just getting your message out there, and you want a free marketing and website audit, just go to hempaware.com and submit the form on the homepage there, and we'll be happy to do a walkthrough of your website and share some insights with you on how you can improve that. But my guest today has a thorough background. I'm going to let him kind of share his story and what led him up to working in the hemp industry, but he has some amazing insights and a solution that he's going to provide to be able to monitor and track our carbon removal in the hemp world. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to Gary Burns. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hi, Tyler. Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you here today, and thank you so much for the opportunity to tell our story. Yes, hemp, we believe, can save the world, Tyler. It's that simple and it's that important. And our story begins back around 2016 when the UN Sustainable Development Goals were announced, and then also the Paris Agreement was announced. So it looked like the world was finally coming together to try to solve these big social problems that affect people all over the world, and climate change being probably the most important one. Because if we don't solve the climate problem, then literally nothing else matters. And I think that, that's a really important point to make. A couple of years later, I was at an air display at the beach just south of Dublin here with my daughter, Miley. And as the jets were flying low over our heads, Miley turned to me and said, "Dad, what's that smell?" And I said, "That's jet fuel, honey." And she said, "I love the smell of jet fuel." So it was a real dad moment. And then she's very clever. She said, "Dad, is that part of the reason for global warming?" And I said, "Yes, it is, but it's only a small part of it. And don't worry, there are lots of smart people working on it." A couple of years later, we got to 2021, and it turned out that people weren't really working on it. And, the level of CO2 in the air was just getting higher and higher. That's when Elon Musk turned and gave $100 million of his own money to run the X Prize carbon removal contest. And what that did was it set out a requirement for a mechanism that would remove CO2 from the air at scale and then sequester that carbon, lock it away for a period of at least 100 years. Now, I knew that hemp was really super effective at removing CO2 from the air. Maybe 5 tons per acre, 15 tons per hectare, that kind of carbon removal, and even more carbon then gets sequestered in the soil to help the biome. And I also knew that there was this material called hempcrete, which was a construction material, essentially a replacement for concrete, made from hemp with just lime and water. And I knew that there were buildings in Europe dating back to the 8th century that had been built from hemp and were still standing. So there was no problem with the long-term carbon sequestration. So I put these two processes together and felt that this was a strong model for a carbon removal mechanism that could also not only lock that carbon away for centuries, but actually use that carbon to build sustainable housing and infrastructure, which is everybody in the world needs more housing and more infrastructure. And ideally, we want them sustainably built, because cement and concrete are actually responsible for 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is quite shocking. So, I said, right, I quit my job. I was working for a tech company. I said, this is too important. This is too big of an opportunity. So I quit my job and I put the project plan together. I started the hempoffset.com brand at that stage, Tyler, and I have an interesting insight on that a little bit later. So we submitted our plans to X Prize. I got a little bit of publicity locally here on national radio in Ireland, and that brought in Felix, my co-founder. He joined the business then. He completely got it. And what we find is that when people get what we're doing, they really, really get it. And it's really exciting to share this vision. And then
Absolutely.
in 2022, Tyler, big step forward. We discovered that Google is running this global program called the Startups for Sustainable Development Program. And what that means is that Google is supporting companies that aim to help achieve the UN SDGs. So we applied for that. We blew people's minds in Google about the capabilities of hemp. They really were not aware. So we were admitted into the program, and that has given us real access to Google experts, as well as ongoing training and workshops, and even the potential for software development assistance from Google as well, because we are very much a software technology company, and our goal is to build a platform that measures and captures all the carbon data around the hemp growing and the hemp construction processes, and then the resulting net carbon gain becomes available for sale as carbon credits. So the sale of carbon credits helps to fund the growing and the construction projects, and that's our mission. That's our goal of what we want to achieve.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So, it hasn't been done before. And if you look at even the other carbon credit products in the marketplace at the moment, Tyler, you've got your legacy forestry carbon credits, which are now mostly considered to be junk and worthless. And then on the other side, you've got these big direct air capture machines, which are huge energy intensive machines that suck the carbon out of the air. And then the carbon is put in a hole in the ground, which strikes me as completely crazy after all that huge financial and energy investment to put it in a hole in the ground. So our vision really is to use that carbon for good and to help build the housing that is needed all over the world. Then this year, we've made some significant developments. First of all, our pilot project in Ukraine is nearing completion. And what that means is that Ukraine, as well as Russia, they have a long history of growing hemp, Tyler. Maybe a lot of people mightn't know this, but it's part of the culture there to grow hemp and use it for any number of really effective end uses. So in Western Ukraine, we found a project there that is growing hemp and then using that hemp to build hempcrete housing for people who've lost their homes in the conflict, as well as war orphans. Now, so they're gathering the data for us there. So we've got a net carbon gain from that project, which is embodied in the walls of these housing units that are being built. So we're selling carbon credits on their behalf. And then for every sale, we're helping to fund the construction of this housing for people who really, really need it. And also nature is benefiting. So our customers benefit, the project benefits, and nature benefits. That's our win-win-win scenario, which is what we're really all about. We want everybody to gain from our activities. So that project, we got third-party verification on that. So we were able to use that as our finalist submission in the X Prize, which went in on February 1 this year. Just a couple of weeks ago, we learned that, unfortunately, we didn't win the first prize in the X Prize, which would have been $50 million of Elon's own hard-earned cash, but we were listed as one of the top 100 most promising carbon removal companies in the world. Now, this is fantastic from our perspective because the scientific requirements around the X Prize were really, really serious, Tyler. I'm not kidding you. These were Excel spreadsheets that went on and on and on and on. And so we had to meet very stringent scientific and data requirements for this. So the fact that the X Prize has validated our vision and our technology and what we want to do, but also our scalability. X Prize doesn't want a project that can do good in one small way. They want something that can be scaled to megaton, that's million tons, and gigaton, that's billion ton scale. So they've validated our vision to be able to get to gigaton scale. which is what we actually need to get to if we're going to stop climate change. Now, we can plant 1 billion trees every single day, Tyler. Fantastic. I'm all for that. But trees can take up to 40 years to show a net carbon gain. We certainly can't build direct air capture machines all over the world because there'll be no room left for anything else. And also, they're very, very slow. So from our perspective, hemp is the only valid mechanism to remove CO2 at a massive scale as quickly as we need to. So we believe, yes, hemp will save the world.
That's incredible. We got a lot to unpack here, but I appreciate you giving that preliminary groundwork for us to dive deeper into. So the first thing that I wanted to ask you about was the existing forms of carbon sequestration or carbon removal, like you had mentioned, direct air capture, legacy forestry, and you said something about how this type of carbon credit system is almost like junk or worthless. Can you maybe unpack that a little bit? Like what did you mean by that, and how does it compare to hemp?
Yes, you will find that one of the biggest certifiers of forestry credits has essentially been exposed by media investigations over the last year or two, Tyler. So not only were they not capturing and sequestering the amount of carbon that they claimed to be, but often, like, for example, indigenous people were being moved off their native land so that some corporation could come in and say, no, this is our forest now, we paid for it. So it was actually causing harms, as well as the fact that you can't really measure the carbon gains from a forest without cutting it down, Tyler. Now, hemp, on the other hand, is designed to be cut down. It grows from seed to harvest in just 4 to 5 months. In hot climates, you can grow 3 crops in a year. So you're essentially talking about carbon removal in real time. And that's what we aim to be able to measure using satellite imagery technology and also carbon analysis and a feedback loop in terms of the data and how we measure the data. So you've got a big problem with the legacy forestry, and the evidence is there for everybody to see. And, you know, we're actually overcoming a really bad situation in terms of voluntary carbon markets. These are markets where companies or individuals aren't required legally to offset their carbon footprint, although some areas, for example, California and also the European Union, they have mandatory offset schemes. So heavy polluting industries must purchase carbon credits, but nature-based solutions aren't allowed in these schemes because essentially they are discredited. And these people were verifying themselves and essentially selling junk and worthless credits to big customers. So the entire industry needs to be shaken up. And what we aim to do is to use science and data to solve the problem of trust and transparency in carbon markets. The beauty of hemp, Tyler, is that once the crop is harvested, it can be weighed. It can be analyzed for the percentage of carbon in the dry stalk fiber. And then that will give you a number for the amount of CO2 that has been removed from the air. And then once it goes into hempcrete and into housing, whether that be blocks or poured or other materials, then you've got a weighted end product. And then you can tell, again, this is how much CO2 has been removed and how much carbon then is being sequestered. So hemp, we believe, is the magic bullet in terms of being able to solve climate in a measurable and transparent way.
Interesting. So you created this pilot project in Ukraine, which is sort of like this demonstration of how your carbon credit system is going to work.
Yes.
But can you kind of unpack, just for those people that are clueless about what carbon credits are and how it's a monetary opportunity? Like, for example, so you use these third-party testing through science and data to determine, okay, this farmer has sequestered X amount of carbon, and then each carbon, like, is it each pound of carbon equals a certain dollar value? And then who do they get the money from or the credit from? How does that work?
Yeah, great question, Tyler. just to use our Ukraine project as an illustration of the value chain here, we're selling the Ukraine carbon credits at $120 per ton. So typically carbon credits are measured by the ton of CO2 removed from the air. So what we do is we split the money three ways between the grower, the builder or maker, and our platform that does all the verification and measurement and the sale of credits. So when a customer, such as a company that wants to take action on its carbon footprint, we can help them to measure their carbon footprint. We can help them to minimize their carbon footprint. Then we can help them to manage the outstanding carbon footprint that essentially can't be reduced. And that's just the reality of the world we live in. So we can say, right, you've got this carbon footprint. We'll say it's 1 ton. So you can purchase this 1 ton of carbon credit from our platform. You pay $120. From that $120, $40 goes to the grower, $40 goes to the maker, and $40 goes to the platform for us for verification. Now, in Ukraine, because it's the same operation is doing both the growing and the building, they would then get $80 for each carbon credit sold at $120 per ton. So what we aim to do is to unlock that carbon credit value that's inherent in every hemp crop. You'll find typically, Tyler, people get a lot of use out of the outer part of the stalk for textiles or for even housing insulation material, and then the seeds and the flowers, with rich seed oil and products such as CBD, for example, from the flowers. Typically the stalk doesn't get used as effectively as it could be. And so what we're saying is that dry stalk fiber, which is typically 44% pure carbon, we think there's a lot of value in that. So by taking that dry stalk fiber and using it to create hempcrete and build housing and infrastructure, we're unlocking the value from that. And our goal is to make hemp the most profitable crop that anybody can grow anywhere.
Interesting. So just to make sure I understand how you're describing this. So the carbon itself, in terms of the tonnage, so 1 ton of carbon is $120.
Yes.
And you're saying, okay, this farmer put the seed in the ground. We can measure how much per acre they've sequestered, and then created by like a company, Fortune 500 or a small mom and pop, or any business can determine our carbon footprint. We want to offset our footprint, so we're going to invest in your carbon credits, and so their capital gets invested into your platform to offset their output. Do I have that correct?
That's correct. So essentially, when somebody wants to purchase carbon credits from our platform, they're basically funding the growing of hemp and then the sequestration of carbon into materials. The sequestration into hempcrete or similar materials is very important, Tyler, because without that, you don't have a carbon credit. Because you might take it from the air and then you might use the hemp stalks as animal bedding, as an example, which is great. But that carbon wants to join with 2 oxygen molecules or 2 oxygen atoms and form CO2. That's just the way things are. Carbon and oxygen love to get together. So we need to keep them apart. And the best way we can do that is to create this lime binder mix, which basically locks that carbon away. And get this, Tyler, there's even an additional benefit. Once the hemp carbon fiber has been used to build housing with hempcrete blocks or poured hempcrete or whatever process is used, through the process of carbonation, the building continues to absorb carbon dioxide from the air forever. It almost becomes a living carbon dioxide magnet. So it just keeps on giving. It keeps on giving. Plus, hempcrete compared to concrete, there's no comparison in terms of it's a biomaterial. It feels better. It's not toxic. It's moisture permeable, so it doesn't allow for mold growth, for example, indoors. It's thermally efficient. It just creates a much nicer living environment. So we see a time in the not too distant future, Tyler, where pretty much every house in the world is being built with hemp materials.
That's awesome. I agree.
Yeah,
I'm on that mission.
right.
So, Gary, as far as Dow Climate, how people can find you and
Yeah,
get a part of this program, we are
yeah.
going to go a little further in our conversation, but how can they find you and get
Awesome.
involved?
Well, you can find us, absolutely. You can find us at HempOffset.com. This was our first kind of business and marketing position. You can register your intent to look at growing with us and partnering with us there in any way that works for you. And then we found that in talking to some initial corporate people about our offering, they said, hemp, oh my God, isn't that drugs? Or don't people think that's drugs? And we said, of course it's not. This is completely different. It's a completely legal industrial crop. But they said, you've got a hemp leaf on that. We mightn't like to have that associated with our brand. Because, Tyler, we're still at the education phase. We know, for example, in the US, hemp was only reclassified in 2018. So we're overcoming decades of misinformation and disinformation by the fossil fuel and plastics lobbies all around hemp. We're still overcoming that. And, this discussion, I believe, is a very important part of that. So I think this is going to have really strong impacts for people who learn about the capabilities of hemp. Essentially, it's the fossil fuel killer. And because we can create biofuels as well as bioplastics, anything that fossil fuels can do, hemp can do. So we've got this bit of feedback and we said, right, we don't want to risk people getting the wrong idea about what the company aims to achieve. So then we set up the new master brand, Tao Climate. Now, Taoism is the Eastern philosophy about the way and balance. So we see ourselves as showing the way to people to rebalance our relationship with the sun by removing vast quantities of CO2 from the air. And this balanced world means that we're not under the threat of climate disasters. And also, we have a world where everybody has a home to call their own. The World Bank actually estimates, Tyler, there are 300 million new housing units required by the end of this decade around the world. That is a shocking statistic. Now, the old ways are not going to be able to deal with that kind of requirement or that kind of demand. But we believe that the new hemp ways can, in terms of developing modular housing designs, and the raw materials can be grown adjacent to the construction. So it just makes everything easier and more sustainable and connected. And we believe that by solving the climate problem, we can solve the housing problem as well. So using one problem to solve another. So we're showing people the way. So at the moment, we're still running the HempOffset.com and the TaoClimate.com websites. And we've built up a great community around our brands. And we see ourselves as really showing the way, And our new logo, Tyler, is a butterfly, which means a lot. It has multiple symbolisms for us, because it shows our connection with nature, which is very, very important. And also, it's all about metamorphosis and transformation. So what we're doing is we're transforming the carbon problem into carbon good and carbon benefits for people. And also, we also believe in the butterfly effect, whereby instead of people saying, oh my God, the climate crisis is too big, nothing that I can do, little old me. Sorry, but there is, by taking small actions now on your carbon footprint and your carbon emissions and your other aspects of climate, you might be able to help prevent a major catastrophe happening elsewhere in the world. Your carbon actions may prevent a forest fire from actually starting, or it could prevent a hurricane, or it could prevent a drought. So we want people to start taking actions in their own small way or their own big way. And we're ready to scale up to the gigaton scale. And, there are companies out there with enormous carbon footprints. We want them to know, yes, there is actually a way to help manage those enormous carbon footprints. And we're going to show the way.
Which, kind of brings me to my next curious point about your involvement with the startups for sustainable development through Google, obviously Google itself is creating these data centers and doing
Yes.
their best to keep their footprint down. So this would be an
Yes.
example of a business that would need your carbon credits, right?
Absolutely. And Google actually teamed up recently with Microsoft, Meta, and I think it was Salesforce as well, to create a new coalition of tech companies that want to purchase 20 million tons of nature-based carbon credits in the coming years. They know that forestry, okay, it's okay, but it's not great. They know direct air capture is not the future that we want, Tyler. They know nature-based solutions are going to be key. So they're going to be investing in certain amount of forestry, but also mangroves. And we want hemp to be part of that mix also. Absolutely. That's our ambition.
So you actually presented to a team at Google your solution.
Yes. Yes.
Can you unpack that a little bit for us? What you
Yeah,
said they
the
were kind
team
of
that
blown
runs
away. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the team that runs the Sustainable Development Program is very high level within Google. Google as a company is just putting so much resources and so much ambition into this project. So we're so happy to be part of this. And yes, even though Google is building new offices and data centers and they're strive to be the most sustainable company in the space and to do some amazing work, like really, really amazing work, but they weren't aware of hemp's capabilities and its ability to both, remove and sequester and continue to remove CO2. So we've got it on their radar, and we would be delighted to work with Google in a much closer way to help ensure that their operations and their data centers and their other facilities are the most sustainable in the world. And the way they are already is they're definitely leading in terms of sustainability for a massive tech company. And it's important as well. I believe that Google is the most trusted tech company in the world. Their products just work. They're great, and it's given us essentially a usable World Wide Web, whereas before it was just kind of confusing to many people. So they've really unlocked the power of the knowledge of all of human history, as well as the connectedness that we have today. So we're really proud of our relationship with Google, and we still have a lot more to do with Google. So the program actually will run with them up until 2030, because that's when the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that was the target date, that by 2030 we would have significant measurable impacts made across these 17 goals. So we're aiming to make significant progress between now and the end of the decade.
Very cool. Well, I just have a few last questions to kind of wrap up our connection. I appreciate you being on the show. So I have a question for the naysayers out there, or for you to kind of explain how we understand carbon as being the contributing factor to our environment changing.
Yes.
And there's people out there that say, well, climate just changes naturally over millennia.
Yes.
What do you have to say to them? And let's say just hypothetically, carbon in the environment, because obviously carbon is a natural compound. We need it. We're made of carbon.
We're made of it. Yes.
Yeah. So what do you like? What is your take on that sort of angle, or what would you share with people that are like, oh yeah, there's no problem with climate change and carbon's not a problem?
Yes. Well, I would say that the data doesn't lie, Tyler. And amazingly, carbon dioxide is only about 0.02% of the gas in the atmosphere. It's a tiny proportion, but the impact it's having is unbelievable. So if you look at the amount of CO2 in the air, I think we're up 40% since the beginning of the industrial age. So that's a pretty huge shift, even though it's a tiny amount of gas. And then we've been able to track the global temperature rising as the amount of CO2 increases. And, there are many scientists out there, Tyler, who believe that even if we stop emitting CO2 tomorrow, we're still in trouble. They believe that there could be up to 10 degrees Celsius of heating already baked into the atmosphere with all those cumulative emissions. Now, I don't want to alarm anybody, but 10 degrees C of an increase means the end of all life on Earth. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So we have a relatively limited amount of time to remove vast quantities of CO2. Just stopping emitting isn't good enough. We need to remove it. Of course, we're not going to stop emitting, Tyler. We're not going to stop burning fossil fuels until they're all gone. I'm sorry, but that's the way humans operate. So we need to be removing vast quantities of CO2 from the air. So I would say
Not to
yes. If
mention
you're,
the concrete and the other contributing factors, not
of
just petroleum,
course,
but
of
yeah,
course, the entire fossil fuel industry across the construction. So we can solve pretty much all these problems with the power of hemp, Tyler. And we feel that by taking on the construction challenge initially, then moving into bioplastics and biocomposite materials, then moving into biofuels, such as the requirement that aviation has for significant quantities of biofuels in the coming years, we believe that hemp feedstock is the most appropriate mechanism to meet the requirements of aviation for sustainable fuels. So there's a whole lot more that we can do. And what we are aiming to do is to essentially create that software platform that allows all these amazing benefits to be brought to market at a massive scale by measuring that carbon and that carbon gain across all these processes. That's our vision, and we're aiming to deliver it in the next few months.
that's awesome. Well, to kind of shift gears a little bit into the more entrepreneurial side of things, because a lot of our listeners are hemp entrepreneurs. They work for a hemp business. They're trying to get more sales and get in front of the right buyers. What would you say are some of the strategies or techniques that you've used as a hemp-based business to find the right clientele, and what sort of messaging do you use? And you have a background in marketing, so is there any kind of nuggets or insights that you can share?
Well, yes, Tyler, I think there's one very important one which we've learned, and that is focus on the why, not the how. From our perspective, hemp is the how. Hemp is the mechanism that does this. That's not really the most important thing to our potential customers and partners. It's the why. And if you start with the why you're doing something, the fact that it's hemp is important, yes, clearly, but it's not the most important thing. So nobody's going to get hung up on hemp and maybe their misunderstanding of what hemp is and why it hasn't been used for decades in the US, for example. So focus on the why. And I think if you can connect with people at the why level, on the emotional level, then hemp just comes in and hemp does the work. Hemp delivers, but why you're doing it is the most important thing, I believe.
Yeah, and I think using that why as your fuel, as your motivation, as your inspiration can help overcome a lot of the challenges that are built into this world of hemp. There's, banking issues and psychological programming around this plant and things that you still have to overcome in terms of education. And so when the going gets tough and you are challenged and hit walls, having that why as your foundation is instrumental in many ways. But it's also, I think, important for branding, because a lot of people, especially the next generation that's coming up, they care more about the purpose and the vision and the dream and why you're doing what you're doing, not just what you're doing. So I think there's a magnetic pull to starting with your why.
I agree 100%, Tyler. Absolutely. And I think if you've got that clarity of purpose, everything else then falls into place behind that. It supports that. And the fact that it's hemp, it's great, but it kind of doesn't matter then, because people are seeing the vision and they're seeing the why, and that's what excites people. So yes, I would say don't be hung up on using hemp leaves in your branding, because some people may get the wrong idea. And if you can elevate your brand to that emotional level, then I think you will be in a much stronger place to tell your story. And if you can tell a great story with an emotional brand, I think you're halfway there.
I agree. Yeah, the power of story is so engaging, and our brains are just wired for it. So yeah, those are our two great insights. Start with your why and really understand the power of story for your brand or your hemp-based business. So Gary, my last question for you is a little more on this philosophical side.
Sure.
And the idea of, let's say you were standing in front of the entire world audience. You were at a podium and you had like 30 seconds to share one message with every human being on the planet. What would you want them to know?
I would say photosynthesis is the most amazing mechanism in this world. Everything, all life derives from photosynthesis. If we can use photosynthesis to solve our problems at a global scale, wouldn't that just be amazing? Guess what? We can.
I love it. Hemp.
Yes.
Awesome.
That's
well, thank you so much. Exactly. Well, I really appreciate you being here and doing what you're doing.
You so much,
I look forward to helping get the message out there. And everyone that's listening, go to Dow Climate, TAO climate.com or hempaoffset.com and check out what Gary's up to, get involved and see how you can incorporate this carbon sequestration, carbon credit system into your hemp business today.
Amazing.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for being here, Gary.
Thank you, Tyler.